Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Raider Jim Martinez for the First Off the Bench Podcast Network, and I'm with Brandon, our executive producer, Brandon Ferst, and a very special guest today for this special installment of In the Paint, Commissioner Gloria Nevarez with the West Coast Conference. Commissioner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Now, I've been doing my research like I like to do, have as much prepared as possible, and I'll tell you the first thing that jumped out and really brought a smile to my face is knowing that I'm not the only one on this installment that has a Mexican dad and a Mexican Filipino mom.
Really?
That is very true, very true.
Wow.
And I said, if I can use that for a lead-in, we're good as gold after that. So yeah.
Amazing. Oh yeah, I was just down there with my parents and we went to check out a new Filipino food cafe in the Bay Area.
Is that right? There's
yeah.
When I get up to Seattle, I like to go over to the marketplace, and in the alley, there's a little kiosk off to the side where it has got the best Filipino food ever. I mean, it is so great. And they have their signage is on, a lot of it's on paper plates. And it says things like, don't sit at this counter if you're not going to eat. And if you're done eating, leave. It's just very direct. But I wanted to mention that because who knows, look down the family trees, maybe we're related somehow.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. So you are a native of Northern California.
Yes.
Yeah, you Santa Clara High School, you went on, had a basketball scholarship to UMass. At what position?
I was recruited as a shooting guard and ended up through some turnover under the basket.
Got it.
I'm
Okay.
only 5'8", so that was a little bit of a mismatch for me to be under the hoop.
So you still get into pickup games?
No, broke down, bad ankle.
Bad ankles, bad knees.
Non-impact.
But you did well there. I mean, you walked out with a degree in sports management. You went on to Berkeley where you got your JD. You practiced law for a brief time. Was that in sports management that you were practicing law?
Oh, that was a cup of coffee right after graduation in a labor litigation firm.
And you didn't want to stay there?
Yeah, no, my parents were really wondering, like, what is she thinking? I had just graduated. I had a mountain of debt, but, my heart was in sport and I jumped ship and took a 50% pay cut. I had to get a roommate and never looked back.
And you ended up at San Jose State where you're the director of compliance and athletics. What a great opportunity there. You were assistant athletic director and compliance affairs back at Berkeley. You went back to the alma mater. Then you did a brief stint for a few years at the West Coast Conference, went on to the University of Oklahoma. Then you went to the Pac-12 where you were very instrumental with the international travel for some of the teams, and even had the international intrigue of helping a couple of the UCLA players, which I'm sure you like to relive every now and then, right, when it comes up. And then in March 2018, the President's Council selected you as the 4th full-time commissioner of the West Coast Conference. Now, I will tell you, I've been fortunate in my long corporate career to have many, many times, I would tell you the majority of my time in the corporate world, I have had a woman as a manager. And they were strong and powerful. And I have nothing to this day. One of my top managers, and she's now on the board of directors where I work, I learned so much and she handled things so well. So I just have a lot of respect for anybody who can do the job and do it well. But the adversity for females, let's just be honest about it. There is Title IX, which helps a little bit right now. And as of 2018, 11 of the 32 D1 commissioners were women. I don't know what the title is now. But is there still a little bit of disparity out there? Do you see it evening out at all?
I do see a lot of disparity, especially in the athletic director and even commissioner ranks, especially at the Power Five, the high major institutions, both in women being able to sit in the seat, but also in even getting a chance to be taken seriously in interviews. So I do think, though, the pipeline's stronger than I've ever seen. Every time we open a job, it's rife with very diverse candidates, unlike anything I've seen in my career. So I think it's just a matter of time before folks filter up and through.
Yeah, I was very fortunate back in the early and mid 80s. I had a neighbor, very good friend, and her sister was Priscilla Oppenheimer. I don't know if you're familiar with Priscilla or not. again, we're going back to 80, 85, all the way into the 2000s. She was the director of minor leagues for the San Diego Padres. Now, you talk about a woman who could tell you what it was like, literally being in the locker room with a bunch of the good old boys, but she was also written up and recognized by Sports Illustrated as one of the top 3 most powerful women in the major leagues back in the 90s. She was very, very, what a great lady to sit and talk with. Learned so much just from the discussions with her. Curious if you've had a chance to introduce yourself to or be introduced to Renee Torrado.
No, I have not, but I will add, the women that went first in that generation. I mean, I owe everything that I've accomplished to their fortitude, their bravery, and their ability to step into the roles and do them well. I feel like I'm in that Gen X, kind of that, generation that followed the true pioneers. And, when I was in college, I had the benefit of, Title IX experience when I played, and great opportunity for scholarship and education, and just hope we can continue to make that progress.
Yeah, when is it going to even out for the women's sports versus the men's sports? Things like, is it still the rule that the women's tournament still cannot use the term March Madness?
Well, we certainly had a great reckoning moment this past Final Four when Sedona Price, shed some sunshine on some of these things that many of us have been trying to fix for years. And so, yes, March Madness will be used for the women's tournament.
As it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Very good.
Many, many other changes are coming behind the scenes that, you might not see or feel watching the games, but make a lot of difference to the athlete's experience.
Yeah, very good. And so here you are in charge of the West Coast Conference, 10 private universities, 6 men's Division I sports that are recognized by the West Coast Conference, 9 women's Division I sports that are recognized by the conference. So many times people just get stuck on, it must be Gonzaga, it must be BYU. But it's not just men's basketball. I mean, it's a pretty good diversity out there as far as sports goes. I am curious. So a school like a BYU, is it just a matter of the West Coast Conference doesn't recognize football and ergo they are allowed to go play somewhere else?
Yes. So if we recognize a sport and you sponsor it, you have to compete in our league in that sport. Basketball, volleyball, softball. But, back in the day in the 50s, we had pretty robust football and quite a few renowned alums. But, as big football kind of ran away with the arms race, I think the programs at our schools found it hard to compete and have robust schedules because with our geography, we're an airplane league, which is very feasible with a squad like basketball, but football, that's a lot. And so I think a lot of the schools began to drop football in the, I think it was early 80s maybe. So while we used to have football, right now, University of San Diego is the only school that has non-scholarship football, and they compete in the Pioneer League. And then BYU was an independent, which made them attractive to add back in 2011.
Yes. Yeah. Very good. Yeah, it's very interesting the way this whole D1 athletics works. But here we are. We are actually 22 months to the day. 22 months ago, March 11th, 2020, COVID-19 was declared a pandemic. And so everybody had to get out their dictionaries and find out what does pandemic really mean, because general population really wasn't sure what does that entail. Okay, this is going to blow over in a few weeks type of a thing. Now, Brandon and I were doing our lead in for March Madness podcast, and we were preparing for that. And then the next day, as we were getting ready to start recording, it's like, whoa, they just pulled 2 teams off a court. They're saying that it's canceled. And then it was just like, that was the domino. And what happened?
It's one of those points in time where I remember so clearly. We have our basketball tournament a week before other conference championships. So we were in Las Vegas. We had tipped off, and at that time you knew this was coming, but you didn't really have any guidance from either the CDC or our counties yet, or the NCAA. We knew we weren't supposed to shake hands, and we were doing a lot of fist bumps, and trying to social distance, but there's so much we didn't know. And at like the day after our championship game, the NBA canceled their games. And that's when all the other conference tournaments, I believe the Big East had already tipped and were at halftime when they had, and I talked to Val and she said, the city of New York was like, go ahead. They had Broadway plays going right down the street. But once the NBA canceled, the sports world, especially basketball, it really became apparent it wasn't safe to conduct games. And then, so, we canceled. We had no NCAA tournament. And by the way, we would have had 3 teams in the top half of that bracket. Boy, that was a heartbreaker. And on the women's side, Portland women won our champ game for the first time ever and missed out on their chance to get to the NCAA. It was just such a heartbreaker.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Who knew we'd still be dealing with this 2 years? I thought 6 months to a year, sure, but 2 years later, it's...
So you and how many people are in Las Vegas of your staff and personnel? Who actually gets the call from the NCAA saying we're pulling the plug?
Well, yeah, we were done. And the NCAA put out a press release, and that's how we all found out. So it all happened so quickly. And then the very next thing was, okay, what are we going to do with all of our sports and championships for the spring? Because you roll right out of basketball into baseball, softball, golf, tennis, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember we were prepared to put out a press release. We met at like 8 a.m. that morning. By the time we got the press release where we wanted it, by the time we released it at the end of the day, we were one of the last conferences to release. It happened so quickly.
Yeah. And I'll jump in here real quick, Raider Jim, just to ask one of the questions I was thinking about. Obviously, I think for most of us, there are problems that are apparent, loss of revenue, loss of opportunity, Portland women and the 3 teams and other sports that, maybe we're not aware of. But in the last year and a half, what do you think has been the biggest, let's just say, unexpected hurdle? Something that, let's just say layman's or people who are just kind of blinded by the 40 minutes of tip-off. What are the things maybe behind the scenes that we would be surprised to know was a big hurdle?
Well, I don't know that it's a surprise, but it's a much bigger factor, especially as this has gone on so long, is really the mental health toll this is taking on our athletes, our staff, our coaches. I mean, a lot of young people identify their college experience with participating in athletics, and in this vacuum when they're competing in bubbles or they're in dorms by themselves and only their team is their, safe pod. It's really difficult. And then, we've extended the eligibility rules. So you got a lot of super seniors that are sticking around. And I just think the length of time, the churn and burn it's taking on our staff, there is no normal. There is no pause and refresh. Even over the holidays, all of us are trying to reschedule our first week of basketball season. And so I really, people ask me, do you love your job? Every day, my worst day, I'm still working in sports, but this is the first time I've really felt kind of the people around me not feeling that recharge you normally get when you go and watch people compete and play games and win. Now it's more of a sense of relief, like, whoo, we got that game.
Right. If I remember correctly, if I did the math right, and if I'm remembering back to when I first reached out to you, to your office, I think it was last season, the West Coast Conference in men's basketball alone, I think you guys had to reschedule like 57% of your games.
Yeah, we weren't alone. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I was really proud of our folks. In one, we were really committed to playing if we could play, but we weren't afraid to cancel or do the right thing with regard to following county guidelines. And, in the West, we were some of the strictest jurisdictions in the nation. But we still got a 75% completion rate in our men's basketball season and like a 95% completion rate on the women's. So we really were able to put together, and the goal for NCAA selection is to put together a strong body of work from which to be judged for entry into the NCAA. And I think we achieved that despite tremendous challenges.
Oh, I thought it was fantastic the way everybody pulled it off. But just to be in flux like that from a Thursday to a Saturday to the following week, and then when you think it's going to all straighten out, here we are with this new strain. The Omicron comes up, raises its ugly head. My big allegiance is to the Gonzaga Bulldogs. My son went there back. He happened to go there the year that they made their Cinderella run. That was his freshman year. And so we've just been tied to the program ever since. Brandon and I spoke with Matt Santangelo last spring as we were getting underway. And so I'm very excited every year when they make their appearance down at USD. And I was all excited this year. Oh, it's going to be during Christmas break and all that. And then I went and it's like canceled. And then they didn't get to play Loyola Marymount. And then, and on and on and on. Finally got back on the court against Pepperdine. How tentative has it been for you and for the scheduling for the men and the women, for all the sports, not just basketball, but any of these winter sports that are going on? Is it a day-to-day you monitor it? And at what point do you decide that it is time to pull the plug?
Yeah, it's similar and different from last year in that similar, we're still dealing with teams that get put, we've called it, put on pause or, put on the couch by COVID. But last year was a little different because as soon as someone on the team tested positive, the whole team was on pause. And that was kind of true with some nuances throughout the league. And it made the date on which they were on pause a little clearer. This year, we kind of got through non-conference pretty well. We didn't lose that many games. But when students went home for Christmas and came back, we had this kind of protracted time when people were getting tested, but you had a 5-day quarantine. They still could come back and play. And because we're vaxxed and boosted, it didn't necessarily knock the whole team out. We had flights that weren't coming back, so you couldn't even test. So we had this vague gray area where we couldn't really exactly know when a team didn't have enough players to play. So that wrinkled into it, one. But two, now that most of our teams have had COVID through it, and thankfully no hospitalizations or serious outcomes from it, mostly mild to medium cold and flu symptoms, that many of our teams may be in the 90-day window. So we're optimistic we could still get in a pretty regular conference play and just come back and grab these first 2 weeks of games and try to squeeze them in. Now, chances of us finding a solution for every game that was knocked out, still got to figure it out because, as you referenced, we have 4 teams in the top 40 net ranking. And we have a very special opportunity to get 4 teams in the tournament. So what we don't want to do is jam in some games to the point where they're playing 3 games a week back to back to back. So we spent the last 3-4 days really working with our ADs, trying to get some policies that would give us flexibility to get the conference games in, but also preserve, not run our teams into the ground as they're trying to make it to the NCAAs.
Right. How are the spring sports looking? Everything's going to go off for them too, or?
Spring sports is a lot different because a lot of them are outdoor. So you really have an opportunity there to, social distance, aerate, that type of thing. Basketball's so challenging because you're just in everybody's personal space all the time. Right.
Yeah, and that's, I remember watching the Baylor Gonzaga national championship game. It was just like, what an environment. These kids are sitting on the sidelines and they're 6 feet apart, and here's a folding chair for you and a folding chair for you, and they can't lock arms. And it's like, wow, what a difference. At least they got to play the game though. That was an important thing. I mean, my heart goes out to these young men who put in what they do, and their parents too, for their entire lives to get to that, there it is, the end of the rainbow. And man, they couldn't play the games. So I'm hoping that, as you said, that we're through this and we're in the 90-day window and everything's going to go off. There will be a championship tournament in Vegas, and then on to the, see if Gonzaga can get it this time around. What do you say about Gonzaga University and what they've meant to the West Coast Conference?
Well, and you mentioned I had the fortunate opportunity to be in the league early in my career. And so that was, I think, Adam Morrison years. So really kind of the beginning of Gonzaga being a perennial power. And what they've built is so special. They didn't invest overnight and buy talent and facilities. They built that over decades, 2, possibly 3, if you count the pre-Mark Few. And what they've really done is create a culture. that has been able to withstand the test of time, and their trajectory has been so phenomenal. They truly are. They represent what's possible at schools of our size and ilk, and without football. I mean, basketball in our league is our football. That's the way we think about it. That's the way we treat it. And I just think it's been really, so I don't think people realize, without BYU, the average enrollment for WCC schools hovers around 5,000.
Right.
I mean, we're tiny
Right.
relative to some of the people that we compete with. And not just basketball, we win national titles in just about all the sports we sponsor. I mean, Pepperdine men's golf national title, women's tennis runners up. BYU went to the volleyball Final Four, Santa Clara Q, women's soccer, and it's not all one school. You know, it's really, really special how competitive this league has become and maintained despite the arms race that's out there.
Yeah, definitely. Brandon has heard me tell the story before. When my son was a freshman at Gonzaga, he called me in October and he said, hey, the word on campus is these guys are pretty good and they may even make it to the big dance. And again, that was the 98-99 team that did that magical run. But and here they are today. And yeah, when you were back at 05 is when you were back there. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, maybe.
Yeah. And you're right. That would have been the Morrison years. And it just is amazing. I think it speaks to all the universities that they're able to go out, because I'm also a big fan of Randy Bennett and I mean, that man, how these guys recruit is just boggles my mind. But you know, they bring in some new kid from Australia, 2 or 3 deep every year. And it's like, where did you find these people? And
yeah, they're innovative, they're creative. We have a fantastic group of really talented coaches. I couldn't be more optimistic. But when you talk about recruiting, it reminds me, I was talking with Dan Dickow at one of the Gonzaga games, and he has such a great story that I think typifies what's great about our league, what Gonzaga has been able to achieve, because he was at a big Power 5, you know, school and transferred to Gonzaga because for him it was a better fit. He got more hands-on attention. You know, he was able to walk in the shoes of a regular student and not just be in that student athlete bubble that can happen. And to hear him explain it, I'm like, oh, I wish I could just bottle that and put it in an ad campaign for WCC Sports, because that really is kind of our special sauce.
Yeah, and I will tell you, if you haven't had a chance to speak with him again, it was just by good fortune and a couple of phone calls. We got Matt Santangelo on, and to hear him tell the stories, what was it like to be part of that Cinderella team? You just still hear it in his voice. You know, he loves to talk about it. And matter of fact, the first person I contacted from that team was Richie Fromm. And he says, I really appreciate it. He goes, but you know what? You want to talk to Matt, he'll talk all day long. And he did, and it was great. Now we're getting close to the end of our time and the time that you've extended to us. Real quick, now, West Coast Conference, small conference, name, image, likeness. Does this have any impact on West Coast Conference at all? And it's interesting because as I understand the way it works, it goes according to state and what is already in place. And something like Washington State, there is no prerequisite or predetermined package out there for name, image, likeness. So, you know, Drew Timmy can put his name on billboards and things like that, and a little easier maybe.
Yeah, and it's impacting us all. And I think it's probably a long time coming. I wish we could have kind of changed with the times and started developing this policy as social media started, but hindsight 2020. I do think it's a positive thing, especially in our footprint, technology savvy, very embracing of new innovative opportunities. Right now, as a league, our office is really involved. Our schools have really started of a place of educating student athletes on how it works. You know, what is a brand? How to protect your own rights. You know, you've already heard about deals where student athletes are signing their rights into perpetuity. Like, nobody needs to be bamboozled by a contract in their freshman year. And that's just unfortunate. So I think our schools have really started in providing the student athletes with the toolkit to navigate the market. Because there are really only 2 guiding principles out there. 1, you can monetize your name, image, likeness. And 2, schools cannot broker the deals on your behalf. But after that, we're a little bit of a wild, wild west until we have kind of a green light from federal government that if we do legislate ourselves and put some guardrails around it, we'll be clear of antitrust liability. And we haven't had that yet. So for
Very
now,
good.
we're just trying to navigate.
Great. Again, thank you so much for the time you've extended to us today. It's been an honor. Would love to have you back on to talk a little bit more about some of the things that we just kind of scratched the surface on. You are a wealth of knowledge. You've got a great, what a great resume. And again, Hispanic, Filipino, what more could I ask for?
That's amazing. We have to talk more about that.
We do.
That's its
we
own
do.
pod right there.
That's
Really.
it. That's it. Commissioner, thank you so much again. Appreciate it very much. And we hope that you will join us again in the future.
Thank you to you both. Be safe out there.
Thank you. Likewise. Go Zags.